Greetings, my name is Pete Ring. My background is in military aviation and in particular fighters and choppers. I do these chats on behalf of Air Force Association New South Wales and on behalf of Wings magazine and also for our Wings Australia YouTube channel. Could I also ask that if you like our videos, then please subscribe to our channel and have a look at the description on our channel for this video, and you'll find links to subscribing to our magazine called Wings and subscribing to Air Force Association New South Wales. So today I will be chatting with Air Vice Marshal retired Bob Treloar. Bob graduated as an Australian Air Force pilot in 1968. He then served in South Vietnam with 9 Squadron in 69-70, flying Hueys in support of the Australian Task Force. Bob was then posted to flying Mirage fighters, where I met him, and later on commanded the Australian Air Force's first operational FA-18 squadron. Later in life, he commanded the Integrated Air Defence System at Butterworth, Malaysia, and finally Bob became Commander Australian Theatre. So welcome that was in 1999. So welcome, Bob. Just to put on record, my aim is to record Australian military history as lived, and the mental makeup of our personnel need to do a very demanding job. So the first one I hit on with you, Bob, is can you relate your experience of your first flight in country in Vietnam in 1969? I believe it was meant to be a quick trip around the province, pointing out landmarks and aligning them with picto maps, but it turned into something else.
Indeed it did. Walking out to the aircraft for the first time in a war zone was one with butterflies in your stomach and wondering just what's in front of you. Our aircraft in Volunteer Airfield were revetted against attack by rocket attack, which happened it happened now and then. And so the helicopter sat in a revetment with about 2 meters clearance either side. So just getting the helicopter out of the revetment was the first challenge. We'd never done in Australia. So it just set the scene for the fact that this was a different environment from one we've been flying in Australia. The intention was to do stand up for a new BOGRAT, was to get airborne with an experienced captain, and he would take you to Nui Dat, show you the Army Task Force, the Australian Task Force, and its layout, and show you all the pads were in our own crew room, and then fly you around the province and say, these are the salient points, and you look at them on your map and you work out where you are for future reference. And we're also the parts where don't fly there because that's heavily infested with enemy and they have fairly heavy guns, which will make it difficult for a helicopter. From the trip from Volunteer to Nui Dat was about 15 minutes, 20 minutes maybe, and we were halfway up there and I was still looking at you mentioned picto maps. The picto map was a photographic overlay of the whole area, and on top of that we had grid lines, contours, salient points that needed to be put there. They were permanent markers. And they had various shades of green for jungle and heavy jungle, light jungle, and open fields. I was still working out what this picto map looked like, and we were flying north thinking, I'll get this right sooner or later. And one of the crewmen reported seeing green tracer coming up out of a village below us. The village was Dat Do. It was it's a large village. It was circular, so it stood out well as a landmark, and it was predominantly a Catholic inhabitant. The captain, John Sampson, picked up the tracer, immediately went across to the Arvin frequency. It was the people who occupied that area were the South Vietnamese Army, the Arvin, normally with a US advisor. We got onto their frequency and there was a call for help from the location that they were in the middle of an unexpected firefight with the Viet Cong and they needed assistance. John immediately said, yes, Sambo said, we'll do that straight away. He didn't ask the crew, but then again, he was the captain. And I might have been a bit more reluctant, I think. But anyway, we ascertained the situation. They said you need to land in the village square, which wasn't very big as a village square. Sambo did a low fly approach from the south. Having come from Australia, where you flew at reasonable heights, even at low level for training purposes, I was looking at our rotor tips, and they weren't far off the side of the levee, the small levee banks of the rice fields. So that was sort of eye-opening to start with. And he did some magnificent flying up over some high palm trees and lobbed it down on the village square, so we had the minimum notice to the enemy that were coming. It was chaotic in the square. There was the occasional tracer being fired around. The US Army captain, I think, raced over and spoke to me, which surprised me because I was the co-pilot, and asked could we take on some wounded and get them, evacuate them, so get on with the fight. He said, of course you'd say. He didn't think to say no. And so he did that. And while they were doing that, in this, around the corner of one of the huts, that turned up a Viet Cong soldier aimed at doing mischief to us. It's the first time I'd seen a VC soldier, apart from the mannequins we had in Australia. He was immediately dispatched by friendly fire, and they then threw the bodies or the wounded into the back of the chopper. There was 7 from memory. We then started to depart the fix. On our way into land, we managed to get a call out to the Australian Task Force, and they dispatched 2 of our gunships to fly overhead, and they arrived just as we were about to depart. But they couldn't do anything about it because it was an urban environment. There were friendlies all around the place. So they were really hamstrung, and they flew overhead, but were not that effective. We left and took the 7 wounded, dead, down to the Australian Field Hospital in Bung Tau, back where we came from. So I knew that part of the trip. Landed, they offloaded them, and we went back to the Bung Tau airfield. The crew, 2 crewmen washed out the back of the aircraft, and then we got airborne and started the mission all over again. This time a whole lot calmer and quieter. So we did the whole trip, and that was day one. And I sort of thought, if this is day one and we've got a 365-day tour, it's looking pretty shaky at this stage. I'm not sure I'm going to get there. But of course we did. Unfortunately, a sad end to it was that the Viet Cong did get the better of the fight. And next day when they did the clearing operation, they found several dead soldiers, I think. But certainly I was later informed that the young US Army captain advisor had been found with his throat cut. So it was a sad end to day 1, day 2 in operations.
Very startling.
It was eye-opening and made you focus for the rest of your time. And
how old were you? About 20 or 21 or something?
Oh, no, I was pretty old. I think I was 22 or 23.
Big introduction to the world of Vietnam.
It was a big change from peacetime Australia to a war zone.
So it wasn't that long further down the track, in essence, that you have a startling sortie involving the North Vietnamese Army and the village of Binh Ba. Did I say that correctly? Binh Ba?
Binh Ba, yes.
Can you talk about that for a while, because this was rather a monumental sort of engagement.
It actually turned out to be one of the 4 major battles that the Australian Army fought in South Vietnam, but we didn't know that on the morning. The battle started when there was a tank and an armoured rescue vehicle moving up the highway, Route 15, I think, up from the task force, which is situated sort of centre-south of the province, up north to the province border, where there was some unrest expected. As I was passing Binh Ba, which was a village of about 4 or 5 rows of houses with about a dozen houses in each row, and they were plantation workers for the local rubber plantation. I think it was a French plantation. And it was a peaceful area. Again, it was a predominantly Catholic area, Christian area. And the tanks were moving, the tank and an APC rescue vehicle or recovery vehicle, when they were passing passing Binh Ba, the tank was hit with an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, quite unexpectedly. I mean, it was a high risk going up that route, but I didn't expect to have any to attack an armed vehicle. It hit the turret of the tank, damaged the tank, and wounded the gunner inside. And at that stage, they radioed back to the task force, and they dispatched a light fire team of gunships, which I was the co-pilot on the lead gunship. The light fire team has 2 gunships. The gunships are armed with miniguns, 2 miniguns per aircraft, one either side. They fired about 6,000 rounds a minute. We carried 10,000 rounds of 7.62 to feed the guns. 2 twin door guns, M60 door guns, one either side. They had, I think, 750 rounds per side, I think from memory. So we were fairly well armed, and we carried 2 rocket pods, 7 rockets per pod either side of 17-pound high explosive warheads. A fairly formidable firepower that's being used. Now, I was the co-pilot of the lead aircraft, Bush Ranger 71, and 2 of us were dispatched to the area, and we arrived at Alpha Company 5 RAR that had also been dispatched. They were the ready reaction team that was always on standby at the task force. And they were being pinned down by fairly heavy gunfire, and they couldn't cross an open area because of the intensity of the gunfire. So they asked us to clear the southern row of houses. The houses were running east-west, and to virtually take out the houses and suppress the gunfire so they could close the enemy. We're about to do that when we're intercepted by Sunray, their boss, and said that the district chief had insisted on us wrecking in the area first to make sure there weren't any civilians in the houses. And you did, they were blowed if I know. But we flew down at just on rooftop level, past the houses on the southern road, looking into the houses under the verandas to see if there are any friendlies there. But all we could see were North Vietnamese soldiers who were firing back at us. And during that pass, which I thought even then was a bit on the foolish side, we had a near miss of a rocket grenade just behind us. Had that hit us, then we wouldn't be having this conversation today. We then ascertained there was an enemy activity, and we were given the clearance to fire. So we then systematically started to take out houses one by one with rocket fire. One gunship in, flying from east to west over the top of the houses, firing past, break left to the south over where the friendlies were pinned down. And while they were breaking left, then the door gunners on the right side of our chopper would put down suppressive fire to reduce our vulnerability. And then we'd go around the racetrack pack between the 2 of us, and we were doing that. During that time, a Centurion tank started to close the houses at the same time while we were under our fire cover. On one particular pass, we had what we call a hang fire on one of the rockets, the rocket tube. The rocket started to burn, but with insufficient power for it to launch from the tube. Pretty dangerous situation because it could go off at any time, and we didn't know when it was going to go off, if indeed it would. But doing the firing pass down and through the houses and then across to the left to over the friendlies, that meant that should the rocket came off at the wrong time, it would hit our friendlies. Well, the rocket had the firepower, the same firepower as a 105 howitzer shell. It's a big hit. So if that had hit our friendlies, we would have done damage to them. So we continued down the pass. We've not been able to do anything except keep the aiming point. And then the rocket did come off at fairly minimum range for it to arm, hit a house, took the house apart as you'd expect, and a single roof tile just seemed to swirl up out of the mess in front of us and sat stationary in front of the chopper. Well, I think as most drivers know, something stationary in your windscreen, you're going to hit it. I felt the aircraft that I saw there for twitch left and twitch right, and then bang, the house tile hit my side of the windscreen, bottom right-hand corner, past my right shoulder, and embedded itself in the back of the rear bulkhead of the chopper.
Wow.
It was not a particularly large hole, probably about 6 inches, I suppose. And it peppered us with bits of terracotta tile, which initially thought we'd been hit, but in fact we hadn't. But we then finished the mission. We destroyed the houses. We thought we were finishing the mission. And the Centurion tank that had closed towards the houses, then we were called to support the tank because it had been disabled, and there were North Vietnamese soldiers swarming around the tank, starting to swarm the tank. So we laid down minigun fire on the enemy and on the tank, which was with fingers crossed, so we didn't damage their own people. But we didn't, and that saved the tank and its crew, so it was a good outcome. Some years later, I think 40 years later, at a reunion, I met the tank driver and asked him what he thought. He said, really happy to hear it. He said it sounded just like light rain on the top of the roof. He said it was very welcome. So we then finished our mission. The friendlies met at the close. The enemy, I had to move across open ground to do that. I did that successfully. And then we went back to rearm and sat in the ground waiting for another call. But it was close quarter fighting and house to house and very ugly fighting by our land forces. And the battle in the village went for most of the day. I think there was over 100 enemy bodies just recovered.
Wow. And did you have, what sort of protective clothing did you have on as far as chunks of roof tile went?
Well, nothing. I had the sleeves rolled up. I think it was pretty hot up there. And after being peppered with on one side with terracotta tile, I thought, no, I'll fly the sleeves down in future. But we had a chicken plate, we call it. It was like a flak jacket. They gave us a chicken plate, which is thick armour, probably an inch and a half thick.
Yeah.
Whatever it was. And on top of that, you wore a flak jacket too. So if a round came through, it would actually hit the chicken plate. If it broke up, then the flak jacket would absorb the shrapnel. I have to say, most of us never wore the flak jacket. It was just too hot. And so we just took our chances with the chicken plate, as we call it.
So did the crewies down the back have any damage to them?
No, they were both leaning up over their M60. So when it hit the back in the middle of the chopper, it just didn't do any damage to the chopper. It just broke up and flew around. Wow. They weren't even sure what had happened, I don't think, at the time. But Dave Moles was the crewman and Al Lamb the gunner, and they both survived quite nicely and still talk to me today, which is good.
But yes, I agree. That must have set a fair amount of shock in the crew. Not that you wouldn't do your job or anything, but when you get back, you'd be wiping your brow and having a little bit of an outlet of some sort of commentary.
Yeah, we did. I think it was we're just happy to be back. I mean, like mission. And the captain of the trip, I was the co-pilot, I think I said, was Al Adams. Al sort of several years ago at a reunion, and his nickname was Captain Death.
Yeah. And
he was convinced when we went to Vietnam that it was a one-way trip. So flying with Al in itself was a bit of a challenge, having known what his thoughts on life were. But we all survived quite well. And it was, again, an interesting view into the world of combat and supporting how closely we work to support our own troops.
Yeah, and how that whole environment is demonstrating how unpredictable it is.
You never knew. I mean, this battle was unintended. It turned out to be one of the most decisive victories, I think, that the ATF achieved in its time there. But at the start of the day, it was just another hot day in Vietnam.
Oh. So I understand that there were other sorties happening in between, but I want to jump to just a month or two later when you got involved with 5 RAR when they were ambushed, and hear your story about that, because I think I want to hear these stories because I think they are an indication to anyone viewing this video of the trials and tribulations of being in Vietnam and how stressful it was in many, many ways. So I just wanted to outline that again, that I'm covering a lot of the incidents, the peculiar incidents that happened to you, that just outline what was happening to probably the most helicopter crews in Vietnam.
Oh yes, by no means was my experience unique. We all had our share of near misses and experiences we recall to this day.
Yeah. So what happened with 5RAR when they were ambushed in August '69?
I'd been in country for 3 months at that stage, or about 3 months, and our apprenticeship to attain our combat captaincy in country took us about 3 months. It was very thorough, and by the time you took over your captaincy, you were ready to handle just about any situation that would be thrown at you, because we didn't know from, I said, just like Binh Ba, the morning started out very quietly and ended up as a complete mess. I just achieved my combat captaincy in August. I think this was my 3rd ride as a captain. And we were Albatross 04. Our call sign was Albatross for the slicks and Bushranger for the gunships. And as
So just what's the slick? Just for people listening.
A slick's a transport helicopter. It's the helicopter in its standard form, in its standard form, just like the one in your photograph over your right shoulder. It's armed with 2 M60 machine guns, one on either side, crewman and gunner. A crew of 2, captain, co-pilot. Captain sits on the right side, co-pilot left side. Has a winch to be able to winch a litter or a jungle penetrator down to pick up people from the ground while you're at the hop.
Okay.
We were Albatross 04, so we're down the pecking order, and as expected, as a junior captain. And our job that day was to be on call for the brigadier, Sandy Pearson. He was the commander of the Australian Task Force. And our job virtually was his taxi. If he called up, we'd beat it up to Nui Dat. There was nothing on the schedule for us that day. That's why we're still at Bung Tower, cooling our heels in the crew room, and there was a call to say you were scrambled for a dust-off up in the Hutsik area. We immediately, our aircraft was primarily to go, so we went straight to the Hutsik area, which is up to the northwest of the province. It's dense jungle. It had been the stronghold for many years of Delta 445, a Viet Cong regiment, which was supported by North Vietnamese Army. It was a hot area, and 5RA had been there for quite some time. So, in fact, before I arrived, they had a rather large fight there to try and clear the area, and the area had not been cleared. When we flew up to the Hutsik area, we knew it was a tough area. There was already a US Army dust-off helicopter at the scene, winching Australian wounded out from the battle.
Now, at this stage, you had your captaincy.
Yeah, the 3rd ride. I was brand new captain.
Yeah, good on you.
Dust off the epaulets. The 5RA Alpha Company had been out on a search and destroy mission, and they had come across a bunker complex, which was much larger than they originally thought they might have found. And they were in a very difficult situation where they were being engaged with rocket-propelled grenades and AK-47 fire and machine gun fire, and they couldn't withdraw. And they had, I'm not sure exactly what it was at that stage, but overall they had 34 wounded for the day and 1 dead from our friendlies. When we arrived, the US Army dust-off helicopter was just winched in its 3rd wounded Australian soldier when they were hit with ground fire, and the co-pilot of the dust-off was wounded. So they immediately and quite understandably departed the scene. We could see where the battle was, or where the fight was, because you could see the odd touches of green tracer coming out through the jungle, which was never a good look. And the call sign immediately called us in to say they had more wounded. Would we come and take them out? Well, the answer, of course, they didn't think about it, was yes. You don't even think to say no. I mean, there are Australians down there that need your assistance. So on our approach then, I briefed the crew on what we had to do, and it's going to be probably a difficult winch for the gunners, the gunner and the crewman, for what I needed them to do specifically. And if either of the pilots was hit, you probably recall that the seats would tilt back, so you get the pilot away from the controls and the other guy handle the aircraft. So we completed that and moved into the hover over the top of the enemy. The friendlies of pop smoke we wanted us to come down to. So we went down, hovered over the smoke, saw the friendlies through the jungle, and the orientation was such that they sat on our starboard side and above it, and we were above them. And right front was where the enemy complex was, and that's where they were engaged. Probably, I don't know, 100 metres away. Hard to tell through the jungle. While we were in the winch, they said they called for what they call the jungle penetrator, which is a device where you send it down through. It'll actually penetrate the jungle canopy, the roof, down to hit to the ground. They put a man on these sort of straddles it like a seat, strap him into it, and we pull him up. It was about a 40-foot winch, I suppose. So we pulled up 2 people on the jungle penetrator and called for the Stokes litter. We moved around a bit to find a small clearing to take the Stokes litter down, because the next person was pretty badly wounded. While that was happening, the enemy had discovered we were there, probably we were there all the time, and fired an RPG at us, and it hit the canopy out to our left, but the shrapnel peppered the top of the aircraft and did some minor damage to us. But I remember seeing the blast out the left corner of my eye, and sort of, apart from grabbing my attention, it focused up my skills. The person on the Stokes litter, we eventually got up through the jungle, through the canopy, and onto the aircraft. And at that stage, we were starting to take AK-47 fire, 7.62 fire around us. And we were told, I think the call sign's words were quite eloquent when he said, dust off, you're taking fire, piss off. He didn't want us crashing down on top of him, and that's quite understandable as well. So I started to move across to the left to keep as much jungle coverage between myself and the enemy position when we were hit by quite a fuselage of fire. Accounts vary, but I thought it was about 19, 20 rounds that hit us. And one went between my feet and out through the instrument panel. Another one just missed Jim's the trapper, my co-pilot said. He turned his head left to see if I said, are we clear left? As he turned left, the round came up and embedded in the doorpost beside him. So that was quite lucky. The people in the back weren't quite as lucky. The rounds came up through the floor. They hit the wounded soldier lying the Stokes litter again in the leg and shoulder, I think. And the crewman, the gunner on the left-hand side, was peppered with shrapnel from the chopper floor. It was aluminium floor, and that hit him all apart. His chicken plate was fine, but the rest of his body, arms and legs were hit. And he, excuse me, he ended up as a TPI in Australia. He was medevac straight back to Australia, as was the wounded soldier. Wow. And we took them back to Vung Tau, to the 8th Field Ambulance pad. They were then transferred to another helicopter and took them down to the Australian Field Hospital. My helicopter had been holed in the fuel tank as well, so we're losing fuel on the way through, so we couldn't go much further anyway. Of interest, 2 years ago, I was up at Caloundra Surf Lifesaving Club and Mooloolaba, and sitting beside a soldier or a digger beside me, and we compared medals. We had the same sort of medals. Talked about Vietnam and said he was here at the same time. He said, although I didn't get to see the full tour, he said I was wounded. I said, oh, where was that? On the Hutsik. Long story short, he was the first bloke we pulled into the chopper. Small world.
Small world.
That was the extent of that. The gunship, we had gunship cover the whole time. They were firing rockets. The minigun just off our right side there we were sitting above the enemy. above the friendly, and the enemy were to the right front, and they were putting rockets and minigun fire into that area. And some of the rockets got pretty close, I must admit. They were being called right down by the army. And Mike Tardent, who was the lead bushranger that day, won the DFC for that action, where it was supported by the heavy fire team, 3 gunships, and then the US Air Force fighter bombers.
And you were awarded a mention in dispatches.
Yes, I was. Yeah, for the crew. I think we got it together.
That's a very dramatic flight in that sense. I don't mean dramatic in the wrong sense, but I mean when you first fly into something like that, you have an idea of what's going to happen, and then when you fly out, it was again totally unpredictable.
Yeah, I mean, knowing what's your favourite, knowing that the first chopper had been hit, and the co-pilot, and bear in mind the Americans flew opposite to us. They flew the captain on the left side, not the right side.
Yeah.
And so the co-pilot was hit was the seat that I was sitting, the same chopper. So I was keenly aware of that. But and the approach in was one that, well, this is what we've been trained to do. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And do it properly, and we did.
A lot of people I've spoken to say, you don't know whether you're courageous before anything, you only know afterwards.
You get braver as time goes on too.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because that the way I see most of the chopper crews that I met from Vietnam, they had a lot of courage to continue to do a job when obviously your lives were threatened in an extreme situation, but continued to do the job until the piece of machinery just couldn't do it anymore, and then you got the hell out of there. So
there's no way that you can ever let down your fellow countrymen.
No,
it's not part of our DNA. You just don't do that. So if they needed help, you were there to help them as long as it took, and as much as it took. And it was a good feeling afterwards when you've done the job properly, because you could see smiles on faces occasionally.
Yeah, I'll bet, mate.
But it was always, it wasn't always like that. I mean, there was lots and lots of tedium and just doing standard missions of hash and trash, taking people backwards and forwards, carrying things around, perhaps not the odd, but several SAS extractions and insertions. They were always up for your attention. So there's a lot of things going on. It was only when it arced up occasionally, always arced up at no notice.
It's funny, I think I met you somewhere in about 1971 when I was at the operational conversion unit as an instructor converting pilots to Mirages, and you walked through the door, and I think we established a damn good relationship while you were on course, and you're a fine bloke, but
you didn't scrub me.
No, I didn't scrub you, mate. You don't realise until later how much is in a bloke that you don't know about, and possibly you either don't have time or it's not part of your day to actually sit down and chat with someone about their past, and possibly sometimes it's inappropriate. But I'm very glad that I learned about your previous. I knew you were a chopper pilot, and that was one of the reasons we had a lot of chopper pilots come through, and that was one of the reasons I actually applied to go to choppers, because I thought there must be something in it for me. So I did find there was heaps in it for me. I didn't face the trials and tribulations you guys did. Then if you skip forward again to October 69, and I've got it down to 6 RAR, was that correct? Alpha Company 6 RAR.
Yes, it was. Yes.
It was,
you're talking about the gunship operation with the US dust-off aircraft?
Yeah.
We were back in the same area again about a month later, 2 months, 6 weeks later. The area was still heavily occupied with Viet Cong and NVA. And they were still causing difficulty in the Australians. The Army was still trying to clear them. Not very far from the incident we just talked about. There had been another dust up with the enemy, and we'd suffered again more casualties. US dust-off aircraft was called, and they called those in preference to us because they carried a trained crewman in the back who was a first aid attendant and could handle most of the injuries you saw for triage before they took them to the hospital, where we didn't. We just had standard combat crew. However, on this occasion, and probably from the history of the area, the US dust-off was not all that keen to go into a wind shear environment and winch out the wounded. I can understand his point of view. But we convinced him. In this case, I was a co-pilot, working up now to gunship captaincy, and Bomber Brown was the bloke who was the captain. We were quite good friends, and Bomber convinced the dust-off pilot that we will fly down near close formation with him and suppress the enemy fire that saw coming up on his approach to the area and protect him. And he was quite happy with that. So Bomber then quite cunningly positioned as such that I was on the side of the enemy. Never quite forgiven Bomber for that. And so we went down and the dust-off pilot wore that, and we went down towards the hob, and approaching that area, we felt a thump on the aircraft, and we were hit with a 20 cal shell. And we immediately had to depart the area. The crewman, or the gunner on the left side, had called that we're on fire. Well, there was smoke coming out of the engine compartment, and we departed. I don't know what the dust-off pilot did. We lost immediate interest in that, and we started to head towards the northeast. And it became apparent after a very short while that it wasn't fuel that was streaming out; it was hydraulic oil that we had taken a hit in the transmission oil reservoir. And that was even more serious, because if we ran out of transmission oil, the transmission was going to stop. When the transmission stopped, we weren't going to keep flying. And it was depleting. As from memory, I think Bomber said that the low pressure light, or the light had come on, the warning had come on, we're in low pressure already in the transmission oil. There was a fire support base about 5 kilometres to the northeast of the action where we were. We thought we could make it to that area, and we did. The gunship was still fully loaded. The gunships, when we flew them, were above the maximum permissible weight for the Iroquois. So they handled you had to be careful when you handled them, and you didn't throw around near the ground without care. And found the fire support base, found a clearing in front of the fire support base. We were big enough to take a chopper. So we immediately plonked the chopper down there and shut it down as quickly as we could. And sitting there and breathing a sigh of relief, we were fine beside the fire support base and the guns. There was a section of 105s actually firing at the time. And a soldier came out to talk to us, and he was fairly agitated. He said that we landed in the middle of his minefield. He wasn't happy about that. And so we sat and thought about that for a bit, and eventually we got another message to say they put a ribbon down for us to follow through the minefield to locate the aircraft, which we did. Like all fire support bases, it had a pile of dirt all around a bund, probably 7 feet high, whatever it was, and we scrambled over the top of that into the fire support base, spoke to the battery commander or the section commander of the guns, and he is also unhappy with the fact that we're interrupting him because he was busy. Anyway, he said, we can do, you can't leave your chopper there. I said, well, we can't move it anywhere else either. So we then talked about it, and then it was agreed that we'd unload the chopper anyway, because it was getting towards dark and we couldn't necessarily guarantee that the area wouldn't be infiltrated and we'd lose a lot of ammunition and weapons. So the 4 of us were then back over the bunt, out to the chopper, took the M60s off the unloaded ammunition. 10,000 rounds of minigun is a lot of ammunition to unload. Wow. And it took us quite a few trips with bandoliers of rounds over our shoulders, no heavy, to go through the minefield, up over the bunt, and dump them inside the safe area. As it was dark while we were doing that, so they put on some rather large flares, spotlights down on the chopper and on us. And that just made us feel about 20 feet tall. I mean, we felt quite vulnerable. Behind us was just a black wall of jungle. Couldn't see what was going on in there. And you had to go up and stand up on top of the boom to get down the other side. So it again was an interesting experience. We unloaded the chopper. We sat there. I think they gave us a cup of coffee or a cup of something. And we waited until about midnight. Then they sent a rescue chopper to come and pick us up, pull the crew out. And a US Army Chinook helicopter came in next day and airlifted the chopper back to Vungtau.
Well, so did they winch you out of the fire support base, or did that chopper land?
I can't remember.
Okay.
I think it landed the other side. It would have, because it was in the fire support base was in a thing called Firestone Trail. The large area, the US Army land clearing team had cleared to try and stop the enemy moving around. So it would have landed the other side. It wouldn't have been as dramatic as a winch up.
Well, I always found artillery to be a bit touchy, so I had a few arguments with them as well.
Yeah.
So just probably getting towards the end now, but there was one day you flew 7 hours during the day and 3 hours at night. Do you remember what that was all about?
Oh yeah, I do. I was bush ranger 72. It was in February 69, so it was 2/3 of the way through my tour.
So you're in captain's seat at this stage?
At this stage, I was quite, inverted commas, experienced. I was a gunship captain, bloke called Ian Thompson. We were on pilot's course together, Tomo and I, and then the same chopper course in Vietnam together. And we ended up in the same Mirage course, as you might recall. So,
I do.
Tomo was the lead, I was the second, and we were supporting again Alpha Company 6RAR. They had moved out of the wire, out of Nui Dat, not very far, only 5 kilometres maybe. I can't remember the exact distance. And they come upon an enemy position, which I think they were searching for, engaged in a very close firefight. They couldn't disengage, and they called in gunship support. So we started, we reacted to their call. Earlier in the day, we'd been out to several other contacts around the area, so it was around different parts of the province. So it had been a pretty busy day before we even got to see them. We started the contact, our support, just on last line, or just before last line, and it drew out into the evening and quite late. We called for flares, a flare ship from the squadron, and our 9th squadron had been used to dropping flares. We'd practice those and over the side. But to my understanding was that we'd never used gunships under flares. So this was the first for the squadron, inadvertently. A couple of one of the firing passes, they were calling us in. They'd tell us where that it was pretty difficult to see the smoke even under the flares. The colour was different. So, but you can actually make the aim point somewhat challenging to get the exact aim point. And we're firing very close to our friends to keep the appropriate contact. One pass, it was a check fire, you're hitting us. And they had several wounded out of that pass. And we check fired, paused, then they called us back in again, and we then readjusted the aim point and finished our firing passes. It gave us a rather sour taste in our mouth that we possibly shot some of our own people. The engagement went for quite some time, and it was quite late in the evening. By the time we'd finished, they'd broken contact and they could withdraw, and I think we ran out of ammunition and flew home. Went back to the bar and had a beer. The first thing we did to steady the nerve, and have a quiet beer between Tomo and myself. And about that stage, we got a message to say that they dug the slugs out of a couple of the wounded soldiers, and they were the short rounds, short heads. We had a short-nosed bullet, and we used long-nosed bullets. So the enemy were firing at our friendlies at the same time we were firing at them to try and do just what they did to pull us off, hoping we'd fly away, I guess. So we weren't responsible for it at all, and that was one of the sweetest beers we've ever had.
Yeah, I need to probably say, and if you can add to this, that it's all very well doing gunship operations during the day, and I know that's just is a very difficult task to be effective. But at night, it's extremely difficult under a flare to do the same mission as you do during the day. So the crew at night's under extreme pressure to cope with the lighting conditions and the actual positioning of the chopper, etc. So, would you like just to talk about that for for a minute?
Yeah, sure. The flares we used were obviously very bright, and they were suspended below a parachute. And when they were dropped out of the chopper from 2,000 feet, 2,500 feet, I guess, I can't remember. With the vagaries of the airflow, the flare would move around as it dropped. So the fact that it was dropping and it was moving around meant that the shadows on the jungle were continually changing. So the aim points, or the points that you were identifying, would look different from almost second to second, but they were forever changing. So to try and get a good aim point and keep that in your mind, and bear in mind that the smoke that was coming up from the friendly position, from the popping of the smoke grenades, it also was difficult to see, let alone determine the colour on occasions. Apart from that, flying a gunship, you'd be flying into the attack underneath the flare, so the world was bright around you and you were firing. And then when you pull out and you pull out into the darkness. So you're immediately into, and there was not many lights in Vietnam at that stage. So you flew into a complete bucket of darkness, and you had to fly the aircraft carefully just to make sure you controlled the aircraft and didn't lose control of it. And then you go around the track and come in and try and do it again with different instructions or different requests from the ground commander. But again, it was one of those stages where you worked closely with the army, people you trained with before you went to Vietnam, and it was just part of our job. And we've all, as a squadron, done similar things to that at some time or other. And I think it's a great credit to the squadron for its history and the fact that it did so many things that I think the general public don't know about, and
Yeah.
certainly at the time the Australian public didn't care.
No.
So I thought that we, members of the Line Squadron from start to finish, should be proud of our history.
Yeah, I agree. And the funny part about it is, for some reason, I've had people comment to me, part of the civilian population, that do people in the Air Force, Army, Navy like war. I go, no, we hate war, and it's not us that are designed to where we are and what we're doing. It's the government, and therefore we're responding to our government boss in doing jobs, and consequently, I've never tripped over any military person who likes war. I've only tripped over military people who are dedicated to their job and to their profession, and it's very, very necessary. And that when you do describe all these incidents you've been talking about, it's done with that reservation in mind, that it was your job and your duty. And I think that's what you already put forward, but I just want to emphasise that.
Yeah, I mean, all of our training and the training of the current ADF is all about being as good as you possibly can be if the government calls you to take the action.
Exactly.
And we are servants of the government.
Exactly.
And the Australian public.
Exactly. And a lot of people don't have that understanding, I don't think, and even the ones that do also get a little bit perturbed by other impressions that the military like war. So on a lighter note, I just wanted to hear about you accidentally dropping your general into in the mud up to his knees.
Oh dear. Well, that was almost my last captaincy ride. The Brigadier, Sandy Pearson, was the commander of the Australian Task Force when we were there. He was very well liked by the Army, by his own troops, and respected. He was a good leader. I was flying as a captain of, I think, Albatross 05. Again, I was the Brigadier's taxi, and we were pre-planned to go down to the way down south in the Delta to an area that was not particularly secure, but where all the commanders were to go to convene for a rather large conference meeting, whatever it was. So we were prepared for the mission and flew into Nui Dat, picked up the Brigadier Sandy Pearson and his ADC, and off we went down to the Delta. It was part of the monsoon season. It was wet. The Delta area was normally just rice paddy fields, but they were flooded as well. And so the army outpost where you see a strip of land for choppers or caribous or 123s to land, and that's all you can see sitting in the sea of water. And low cloud, we fly down there. Ted Bark, I think you might know Ted Bark. Again,
I do know Ted, yes.
Ted was on, we were on the same pilot's course, same chopper course, getting them together. And Ted was the co-pilot, and we took turns at sharing the stick, and one would fly and the other one would do the map reading, etc. On the way down, I said, Ted, you fly, I'll map read. So we went down that way. We get to our destination and it's crowded with helicopters, and there's every man and his dogs there, obviously, is there for the conference. And we're looking for some spots to land. We found a bit, it was right on the edge of one of some of the areas, and Ted's hovering around at about 3 feet high, but trying to find a spot so we can put down at least one skid on some hard ground, and the Brigadier can light and go to his conference. Well, I felt alert to the aircraft and look out, and the Brigadier's gone. Look over, he's up to his knees in mud. He missed the hard part. He was still maneuvering towards the hard part, the hard stand. And there he was, and his ADC obviously had to follow him. And so I thought, he looked at us and walked off, and we moved away and eventually found a spot that we could land, dry land. And when the conference was finished, we told him where we were. We had the engine running, the rotors turning, ready to go back to Vangtown, and thinking, I hope I'll enjoy this ride back, because it could well be my last one when the Brigadier's finished with us. Anyway, he came to the aircraft in the right front, thumbs up, comes under the rotor, looks at me, walks around the front of the chopper, bangs on the window on the left side where Ted was sitting. Ted pulled the slide window down and said, talked to him, and the Brigadier said to him, I left your aircraft without permission. I apologise for that. And then jumped at the back of the aircraft and off we went.
Good on him.
That was a Brigadier, a one-star general, talking to a first lieutenant. I thought that said a lot about the man, and the troops loved him, and I certainly loved him after that.
Yeah,
but he was a great guy. But seeing a general, your passenger stuck out to his knees in mud wasn't a good look.
He must have kept his dignity, because he sounds like the sort of person who would go through that without losing his dignity.
He'd have his dignity wherever he went, I think.
He'd have, yeah. So one last one, you're involved in a lot of insertions and extractions of SAS patrols, many of them hot, but apparently your last flight in country was a little bit notable.
It was near my last flight, yes. Might have been my last extraction, I'm not sure. But it was in February. It was a little way before I left. But anyway.
It was in April.
I was Albatross 02. We had a formation approach that Albatross 01, who was the leader and the most experienced of the team, would fly towards an insertion area where to put a long range or put a SAS patrol, and they'd generally be a 5-man or 7-man patrol. If it was a 5-man, we'd take one chopper. If it was 7 or more, we'd take 2 choppers. There'd be one helicopter flying high. There'd been a briefing beforehand, quite a detailed briefing, exactly where the landing spot was to be and how we would approach it and which direction they wanted us to be, so they could egress the chopper straight into the jungle, and we'd be straight off again. The 01 would fly at about 1,500 feet over the jungle, and the 02 would be down at literally treetop level, being directed left, right, pads coming up at your left to 11 o'clock at click and a half, left 10 o'clock at click, etc., etc. So, and then you went into the pad either direct or generally with a flaring turn and flared through 180 or 360 to land. It was the quickest and most efficient way to put the aircraft on the ground. This particular day, we were going way out to the east, out past Swen Mock, and the trees out there would be 120 feet, 130 feet tall, some of them taller in areas. And there was a pad we to drop the SAS into, and obviously this was a pad that once we approached and made our approach, we couldn't go around. The trees were too high once you're inside the pad, and the SAS were always loaded with ammunition and ration packs for their time in the jungle. They were very heavily loaded people. So the chopper was sluggish, to say the least, when you went into that translational field to land it. We entered the pad area, and I looked down between my feet, and I could see smoke coming up from the middle, very wispy smoke. And the close inspection, there were 3 or 4 soldiers, not out in the pad. And I remember seeing they had their rifles stacked in one corner, and they were obviously having morning tea or whatever it was.
Okay.
And they were about as startled as we were. And they immediately jumped up and disappeared with their weaponry. And I was committed to land. I could not go around to that stage. And thumped the aircraft on the ground, told the patrol what was happening on the way down. They jumped out and took off into the jungle. And we took off, and as per our SOPs, we'd hold for 20 minutes, 5-7K away, so we're away from the area, and but within radio range. And there's a whispered call, said, can you come and pick us up?
No.
And we said, yes. Is the pad secure? And they said, yes. I said, why are you whispering? Anyway, we landed. We went back in. Of course, we're going to land and pick it back up again. We had a very close association with the SAS.
Yeah.
Landed. They came running out of the jungle backwards, firing back into the jungle from whence they came. The only people know who can run as fast backwards as forwards when they have to. And while they're doing that, a burst of gunfire rounds hit the just in front of the chopper underneath the rotor. Just one stray burst, but again, it was a bit close. And I'm thinking, I'm getting a bit short of my tool for this. This is, but anyway, they jumped back on board. We were much lighter at that stage, having held for some time, and immediately pulled as much power as you could and got there as quickly as you could. And there was no further incident. We went back, and they had you've never seen big smiles till you look in the back of a chopper with an SAS patrol when you pull them out.
Yeah,
just huge smiles. They're glad to be out of there, and gee, I for one don't blame them. They did a great job.
Yeah. Yes. So just one last thing, but during all these incidents, the crews flying these missions were exposed to significant and life-threatening dangers to achieve critical outcomes involving our Aussie forces. Your very lives were threatened while responding to others on the ground whose lives were also threatened. What mental makeup was needed? What do you think the main thing about your mental makeup was needed by you and your crews to hang in there on the sorties? That obviously where you hung in there, you saved lives, you helped people, you not just helped them, you gave them another chance that maybe they hadn't before. But what sort of mental makeup do you think that the chopper pilots and the crews needed to do these missions day after day?
I think the Air Force trained us very well, and they prepared us for, they couldn't prepare us for the combat, but they prepared us to be able to operate under almost all sorts of conditions short of combat in Australia. And that's a great credit to the trainers, the instructors who did that to us. So that when you get to a situation where it was going to be difficult, you knew it was going to be difficult, that element of training kicked in. And you understood what you had to do and how you're going to do it. So you concentrated on, you had to put aside the thought that this is the mission that I don't want to do. It was, this is how we're going to do it. This is what we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do it. Any questions from the crew? If you had time, you discussed it. If not, they just did what you told them. Not very often. So you were concentrating on doing the job. And you're aware that if you didn't do the job properly, then somebody else was probably going to get killed. So you had to make sure that you did your level best, that it wasn't your fault if anything went wrong. And there's a degree of, I guess, it's an old-fashioned word, but patriotism, with your fellow man, the bloke on the ground, where you didn't want to be and he was doing the job. You felt for him and sure you did the best you possibly could to make sure he survived without being hurt.
Yeah.
And it's just I think it's in the Australian DNA, look after each other, look after your mate.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. So the trauma faced by yourself and many others while serving the Australian government and the Australian people leaves many scars for life. I wish you the best and publicly thank you most sincerely for your service.
I was one amongst many.
If you've enjoyed this chat, then please subscribe to our channel. Our channel supports veterans directly and indirectly. We are all volunteers. Additionally, if you go to the description of this particular video, you'll see links to the Australian Military Aviation History Association and links to Air Force Association New South Wales, and you'll see the subscription button to subscribe to our premium aviation magazine.